What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another super short battle report. I actually really like that name a lot more than 5-minute batrep. The response to my last short-form battle report was great. I really appreciate everyone who watched it. A couple people asked for them to be a little bit longer to give a little bit more thoughts on the tactics and gameplay. So I think we're going to be moving from a 5-ish minute format to, let's go to, I don't know, somewhere beneath 10. So we can call them a 10-minute batrep or a super short battle report. I like that sounds really good, so maybe we go with that. This time, it's another battle between two factions that we will see probably at the bottom tables of competitive play in 9th edition 40k. It is Tyranids versus Genestealer Cults. We are playing Surround and Destroy from the GT mission packet on a super cool table that I built just for this game, an updated version of which is available on our Discord server in the link down in the description. Come hang out with us. We have tons of sweet 9th edition maps designed to be both thematic and competitive at the same time that you can download for free. One more quick PSA as well. If you are watching this at the time it releases, then in about 10 days, the T5S2 Season 1 Invitational will begin, and we'll be streaming tons of competitive 9th Ed 40k on those said maps on youtube.com/tacticaltortoise. Come check us out. It is going to be some of the best 9th edition 40k available, and will all be fully commentated by myself and my team of co-hosts. So check that out and visit tts40k.com for more info. Now back to the battle report. My opponent and I are both playing highly experimental lists in this game. My opponent playing Genestealer Cult fully from the Twisted Helix Cult, bringing in a battalion with a Patriarch, Magus, Primus, 4 units of 9 Acolyte hybrids, as well as a big bomb of 18 Acolyte hybrids with 4 Roxas, as well as a Clamavis and a Nexos to generate those sweet, sweet CPs. 4 Goliath trucks in that detachment, as well as an Outrider detachment, bringing a Jackal Alphas and 3 units of Achilles Ridge Runners, trying out Survey Augurs on those guys. Not sure it's better than the Flare Launchers that we normally see on Achilles Ridge Runners, but I do think it is interesting, although I do think cover ignoring may actually become less important in 9th edition, even though there's more cover on the table. Vehicles and monsters can't get cover, and that's normally where the math really skews to the point where you want to ignore that cover. So I actually think that cover ignoring effects are a little bit less effective, not to mention dense cover typically isn't affected by them, so they don't get any benefit from that. Pretty interesting list. The idea is that it sticks a boatload of Acolyte hybrids onto objectives in those Goliath trucks. Obviously, units and dedicated transports are very difficult to deal with in 9th edition, given that once you destroy the transport, you can just drop OBSEC bodies onto the table, which is very obnoxious. So it is an interesting list archetype, but highly experimental, like I said, and we're really just trying some new things in this game. On my end, as always, I'm playing Tyranids, and a bit of a different take on the last version of the Leviathan list that I played. In the last game, I played double Tyrannifex, but today, I've dropped the Tyrannifexes out. They do a lot of damage once they get there, but you usually lose 2 going in, and the last one has a tough time making back that investment. So those guys have been axed for a big old Chronos Spearhead, which is where a lot of damage from Tyranid armies is going to come in 9th edition, I believe. That's bringing in a unit of 6 Hive Guard with Impaler Cannons, as well as 3 Exocrines and a Neurothrope. Backing that up and adding a lot of resilience to the list is a High Fleet Leviathan Battalion, alongside 24 total warriors on the table, 2 units of 9 with enhanced resistance, as well as a unit of 6. Unfortunately, no upgrades on those guys, and I think those might actually drop out of the list in the future and turn into something else. Just the unit of 6, that is. The units of 9 are great. Those guys all have 2 Scything Talons each, no guns on them whatsoever, or special melee weapons, keeping them as cheap as absolutely possible. We also have a unit of 5 Zonethropes to add some psychic support, as well as a Neurothrope to buff them up, and the Swarmlord to make sure everything can move up the table relatively quickly. Not to mention, the Swarmlord is just a badass dude in the late game. As a quick note as well, we are playing with the T5S2 house rules, that our secondary objectives are chosen after the roll to go first, and it uses the old ITC 2020 style of deployment, where the attacker deploys everything and goes first, and the defender deploys everything after the attacker has deployed, but also gets to choose the deployment zone. In terms of secondary objectives for this game, my opponent took Linebreaker, Psychic Ritual, and Repair Teleport Homers. These are, again, some pretty experimental picks that we were just trying out out, and I don't think that were this a competitive game, my opponent would have picked these, especially Teleport Homers was a little bit of an awkward one, and even Linebreaker is a little bit questionable. Given how aggressive both sides have to be in 9th edition, it is kind of tough to get units entirely in your opponent's deployment zone. In my end, I took Bring It Down, While We Stand We Fight, as well as Raise the Banners High. Bring It Down seems like a no-brainer for me because I'm playing against a billion Ridge Runners and Goliath trucks, so I was going to max that one out pretty easily. While We Stand We Fight meant that I just had to keep 2 Exocrines and a Swarmlord alive to max that out, and I wasn't sure if my opponent was going to have the firepower to knock those big, heavy monsters down. The last pick that I took was Raise the Banners High, and I wasn't sure about this one. Going second, I didn't feel that I had any opportunity to take any good maneuver-style secondaries, so I ended up with this one, but I think were I to play the mission again, I may have swapped that for a different one. Another good option in this game was Attrition, that giving me the ability to get kill more, which I think I did basically every turn of this game, and it would have maxed me out on points, but I don't believe I can take that alongside While We Stand, so we would have to switch some secondaries around. My opponent going first was able to take a lot of board position with his scout moves from his Ridge Runners and then just force a bunch of Ridge Runners and Goliath trucks down my throat to get some good shooting lanes. He was able to kill an Exocrine that I wasn't able to hide behind the terrain, as well as a couple Zone Throbs with some good stubber shots from the Ridge Runners as well. I played conservatively in the early game, just sending out my unit of 6 warriors into the middle of the table to screen out my opponent's turn 2 Deep Strike, since he had his Acolyte Bomb waiting in the wings. Well, I had a not very good Psychic phase, which included one of my Zone Throbs killing itself with the Perils of the Warp, which not only lost me some damage on a Smite, but also their second Psychic cast, and moved them out of range to be Hive Commandered by Swarmlord to complete my full screen. My shooting phase was devastating and killed no less than 4 Ridge Runners and a Goliath truck, leaving my opponent's return fire pretty hamstrung. Fortunately, my screen was still pretty adequate and forced my opponent to hold back his big Acolyte Bomb for a turn, although he did dive out a bunch of Acolytes on the left-hand objective to charge into the warriors I'd put there, and were able to kill almost an entire unit of warriors, but lost an Acolyte unit in the process. Regardless, this aggressive play gave my opponent a dominating control of the center of the table, and he was able to rack up a bunch of points on primary very early. He also killed the second of my 3 Exocrines, which lost me 5 points on While We Stand We Fight, and made me very sad. My counterpunch continued to wipe out my opponent's vehicles, leaving him with 2 Ridge Runners remaining and killing another Goliath tank, and my warriors began to move out into the center to complete my screen against the Acolyte Bomb that had remained in Deep Strike and start killing his infantry. Fortunately, warriors with Scything Talons are really good at killing Guardsman equivalent infantry, and I was able to kill 2 full units of Acolytes as well as shoot one to death with my Exocrine, even though it was in melee, thanks to those new Big Guns Never Tire rules. Whoop whoop! I had used an overrun after killing a unit of Brood Brothers on one warrior squad to complete a very strong screen around my Swarmlord to make sure the Acolyte Bomb couldn't dump in on him. So my opponent elected on turn 3 to bring his Acolyte Bomb into the warriors on the left-hand flank and wipe them out. My opponent had a dominating lead on primary with control of the central 2 objectives as well as the 2 objectives in his deployment zone almost every turn, whereas I was able to rake in a bunch of points on secondary, maxing out my Bring It Down very quickly, and starting to slowly score points on banners on the 2 objectives in my deployment zone. Although my opponent had broken one with a 3-inch Deep Strike from one of his Brood Brother squad to control objective number 2 on turn 2. As we got to the end of the game, my opponent was able to score a couple line breaker points using his characters, as well as get 1 repair teleport homers point off with one of his characters setting their teleport homer in my deployment zone. This was able to start to make up the deficit that he had on secondaries, getting him those 4 teleport homers points, as well as 8 points on Linebreaker, but it was a big deal that early on in the game, my opponent, despite my best efforts, using a couple command rerolls on denies, as well as a Deepest Shadow from one of my Exocrines, gets Psychic Ritual off very early in the game for an easy 15 points. While on turn 4, I was able to clear out a lot of my opponent's remaining forces, as well as rocket Swarmlord across the table to score me the maximum 15 points on primary. That left the game at an obscenely close 72 to 73 points. Certainly one of the closest games of 9th edition that I've played so far, and I think the relative power level of our factions really kind of synergizes to make exciting gameplay here. That said, I do think that both my opponent and my secondary objective choices were not super optimal, I think more in my opponent's favor. Repair Teleport Homers and Linebreaker both are fairly weak secondaries, and a more generic one like Domination would have seen my opponent score a lot more points. On my end, I didn't really have any good options for maneuver secondaries going second that I could pick, which I think is is an extreme downside of the format so far, and something that we're going to have to devise some strategies to counteract. If your opponent doesn't have a list that's easy to score kill secondaries against, it can be very difficult to fight against the early deficit that you get yourself in, not only on primary points, but on those easy maneuver secondaries. That said, I'm interested to get my nose back to the grindstone and see if we can't devise some of those cool strategies. I am super excited about how my list played. The 2 9-man units of warriors are extremely good, very survivable, even against big units of acolytes with bonuses to hit and might from beyond. They were holding their own in melee and clearing out droves of enemy infantry. I am worried that something more hardcore in melee will be able to scythe through them pretty quickly, but we'll see how things end up. So far, I'm not a huge fan of the last unit of 6 warriors. I think that's going to get dropped out, and potentially the zone throbes may get re-examined, but I have liked them so far. They did survive till the end of this game, and although they just fought a Goliath in melee for almost the entirety of the game, they continued to smite it and just be a harassment for my opponent, which I was pretty happy with. I liked the core behind my opponent's army. I think it's a strong basis for a list, and as we've seen in the past, dedicated transports in 9th edition are extremely powerful, which is why they got so many points increases, I imagine, although Goliath trucks are pretty inexpensive, all things considered. That said, it didn't feel particularly resilient to me. My shooting may just have matched up very well with its profiles, but I think it did fold a little bit too quickly for my comfort. So anyway, that's it, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed this battle report. If you do like my content, please consider giving a like and a sub to the channel, as well as checking me out on Patreon, patreon.com/tacticaltaurus, where you can get all sorts of cool stuff like early access to T5S2 tournaments, pods and things, exclusive patron-only videos, and you get early access and ad-free versions of all of my standard videos. Thanks again for watching, everybody. I hope everyone is enjoying 9th edition so far. Stay tuned for more battle reports coming up in the not-too-distant future. Keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming. So I think we're going to be moving from a 5-ish minute format to, let's go to, I don't know, somewhere beneath 10.
Somewhere beneath 10.